Pocono 570 asks, cart before the horse here, but things are looking very positive with Tamir Robinson and Tony Rojas, Penn State's top 2 linebacker prospects. Like Parsons, both are phenomenal athletes. I would not put them in that category, but yes, both are phenomenal athletes. And like Parsons, they'll both have to play They'll both have to learn to play linebacker at college. We'll get to that in a second. To the best of your knowledge of Manny's system, is it easier or harder to handle than Brent Pry's when it comes to the transition from a different position to linebacker? So for the first part, Tony Rojas does play defensive end for Fairfax, so he will have to make that transition. We're going to say this again. There was some conversation last year during his season and probably looking at his highlight tape that Tamir Robinson could be a defensive end. He's the biggest, strongest, most physical guy on his team. When they needed to, they rushed him after the passer as an outside linebacker. He plays linebacker for Brashear. So he lines up in the box, he reads run plays, and he fills gaps. So he's a linebacker. There's no transition for him. If you watch his highlight tape, he also played safety on one of those plays. So he's literally played at 3 levels of the defense. But for Tony Rojas, yes, that is the case. Both are linebackers. So you actually talked to Manny Diaz, referencing this conversation again. Did you get any insight into maybe how to answer that question from that conversation?
Yeah, and so I'm going to say it and then hope you know what it means and can elaborate much more complicatedly, is that a word, than I can, which is he actually laid it out. He was like, all right, Nate, we're sitting in his office. There's 2 doors. Okay. If you say to me, hey, guard the room, and I have to keep my eyes on both doors, right? We're not going to be protected in that room. If you say, hey, you guard that door and stand by it, and I'll guard this door, and both people in the room know where to be and what to do, then you're going to be in pretty good shape. You're going to have those areas covered, which is all a way of him saying that they play a 1-gap system.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that it takes the guessing out.
Yeah.
Right. You know what your responsibility. So it is simply a matter of learning what those gaps are so that it becomes instinctive, because he wants, I mean, he nailed this down over and over and over again, is that his defense is built foundationally on playing fast.
Yep.
If you play fast, you're in business with this guy.
At every position, by the way, defensive tackle all the way to safety, all of them.
But all of those, when he says playing fast, that means, yes, physically playing fast.
Yep.
But also having the recognition to be able to know where to be, and to do it very quickly. And so he's trying to take all of that recognition out. Right? Like, he's trying to make it as simple as possible for these players at literally all 11 spots on the field, so that they can fill gaps, right? And once you do that, he feels as though, one, you've got the only foundation that you need for a outstanding run defense, and then you just build off of that. Once your run defense is set, that's where you get to be able to exploit the nuance, I think was the way that he described it, was all of the beauty of defense in, again, I'm paraphrasing, but all of the beauty of defense to him is in the nuance, in the little tiny things. So he's tried this spring and this winter, obviously, and going into this summer, to establish those core elements so that that's all there. Right. And then from there, they have this opportunity with as many experience, right? Like, they might have a bunch of first-year starters in the works, but most of them are guys who have seen action before, who have played before. Yeah. Right. And so they can pick those things up a little more quickly and then be able to exploit them.
So there's a couple of things that stick out to me. The first is that there's 2 ways. It's called 2-gapping, right? So that is a different theory in football. And there's a couple of different ways you can 2-gap. Traditionally, and what comes to mind initially, is a nose tackle has to play both sides of the center, both A gaps. And depending on what happens in the play, where the formation is, he's reading to know which gap to fill. And if he's really good, he fills himself with one gap and shoves the center into the other one and takes care of both gaps. So those are your Casey Hamptons of the world. Those are your elite Haloti Nadas that are doing that thing. That is not what he's talking about here, I don't think. So in a 4-down front, you've got 4 defensive linemen. They've got their gap. And then the linebacker is reading the running back and reading what happens in front of him. So let me give you an inside zone example because it's easy. So inside zone goes to one side or the other of the closest defensive tackle. So you're running one way and you're trying to get that gap. If the center and the nose tackle stay, this is going terribly explaining because it's a 3-dimensional thing. But essentially,
get the remotes out.
What happens? No, we're not doing that again. What happens? Because again, I need to have you need to see it in 3D. That's why you have the camera all the way up in the press box. So whatever gap the defensive tackle takes, you've got to read the running back and see how he reads it and react that way. Because, and this is the problem that Penn State's running backs had last year, is they were just reacting. They weren't reading and picking the right gap, or the right gap wasn't there. So there's this whole convoluted thing. I think what Manny Diaz is saying here is, the defensive tackle takes this gap, you take this gap, there's no reading, don't read the running back, get in your gap, play downhill, get on the other side, and someone's going to break free because you're going to be on the edge of that guy, somebody's going to get in the backfield, force a cut, and then the cleanup is going to get there. Instead of that read and react, it's more of a react. And it's interesting, and what flows out of that is, I've said this before, that on defense, the only time you're dictating the action along the defensive line is when you're pass rushing. Because for the most part, defense is reactionary. You are reacting to what the offense does, and you're adjusting. But like if you stunt, if you cross gaps, if you put one guy here and he comes over here, or you run blitz and do these things, you are now dictating the terms to the offense. So I think if I were to say stylistically, the difference between the two is Manny Diaz wants to dictate as much as possible to the offense rather than have it be dictated to him on that side. Hope that was accurate.
Was anything that I said?
Yes.
Did it make sense?
Perfect.
Was that right?
Made perfect sense. Yes.
Okay, good.
Chris 92 asks, will this year's squad have a legit deep threat? Could Kaden Saunders or Omari Evans fill that role? I'm putting a pin in those guys for now, especially Omari Evans. He's learning the position for the first time. He played quarterback in high school. That transition from what I saw in the blue-white game is still ongoing. He's learning the position and learning some of the nuances. Kaden Saunders, the door is open to that, but I just, from a maturity standpoint, I'm not going to put that on him right away. I would wait, but I think the deep threats, the vertical stretch guys, Keandre, Lambert, Smith, I still think Mitchell Tinsley, despite what we heard from James Franklin this spring, is going to be that guy because he's proven even when he was not explosive or not as explosive, he was still that guy. And then, of course, Malik Mega and Harrison Wallace being the primary guy that is the sleeper to explode this season as that particular threat. I miss anything?
Yep. No, I would double down and back on Malik Mega. I think that his contribution and him, like, he's the difference between having 3 receivers that you can count on. Really, I mean, 2. I think that they're going right. So you got your top 2. Parker Washington and Mitchell Tinsley, and then you've kind of got this cluster of guys who you're counting on. Keandre Lambert Smith, you're counting on him to take the next step in his career. You're counting on Mega. You're counting on Harrison Wallace. I would say a little bit less than those other 2 guys, but if Harrison Wallace can be a factor, then you've got a bonus there where you've got these different skill sets that I think that they feel like they can play to in the passing game. But I mean, Mega's important for sure.
So a couple things, too, that I think are interesting is that Mitchell Tinsley, and I bring this up again, Mitchell Tinsley played in the slot when Parker Washington wasn't available in the spring. So you already have a better plan of attack from last season to this season when it comes to if Parker Washington needs to take a break. He played, I think, 97% of the snaps last year for the offense. So you have a little more flexibility in your offense built in with the route running that Tinsley gives you. The second thing is, Keandre Lambert-Smith was an amazing deep threat when he caught the ball last season. And when he focused and he was able to get open, and Sean Clifford had no fear of throwing him the football down the field. You have more players to support that role this year. So that's I think the positive thing. So you don't need to go to those young guys just yet unless they prove unequivocally that they're a better option than the veterans ahead of them.
Yeah, and they're not going to. So
yeah,
just
so
right? I mean, let's be blunt here. Like, Kaden Saunders isn't going to play. I mean, not that he's not going to play this year, but he's not going to take on that type of a role.
Yeah,
and Omari Evans isn't either. So those are the
always,
5 guys.
It's always tough because I loved Kaden Saunders on film in high school. I loved what he brought to the table as an advanced route runner for his age. And then just the one thing I always said, and I don't want to keep bringing this up because I don't want to overemphasize one particular thing, but what I saw was he didn't break a lot of tackles, and he didn't look like he was the most physical guy on the field. You can't play small. You can be small. You can't play small. And I still saw a little bit of that in the blue-white game. But he toasted a couple guys. So what's the balance there? And, just right now, when there's no pressure to play him, maybe let him develop. So that's kind of where I'm landing on this.
Well, and just last thought, people change.
Yeah.
Right? Like the guy that you saw on April 23rd at the blue-white game might not be the guy that you see for preseason camp in August. And so given that time and that window, just allow it to happen. I mean, not that we in any way don't feed into this ecosystem entirely with our focus on recruiting. Of course we do.
Right.
But there's also the other side of it, which is just, hey, most of these guys are going to need time to develop. They just are, right? So you can look at the true freshman class and pick out 3 to 5 guys who you think and we think could make an immediate impact, and in some cases a sizable impact. But for the most part,
they don't all need to.
They're gonna take a red shirt and play 4 games.
Yeah.